When old Otis Grant came to claim his soldier son's pension, he uncovered a chilling truth. His Calvin had been accidentally hanged without trial. Sheriff Blackwood, a man sworn to uphold the law, was at the heart of a horrifying conspiracy, hiding dark secrets. But Otis's despair ignited into righteous fury, compelling him to challenge the entire system. Discover how this old man exposed a shocking deception and ensured that true justice ultimately prevailed. The sun beat down relentlessly on the dusty road leading to the town of Dry Gulch as old Otis Grant, hunched over, shuffled slowly, leaning on his gnarled stick. The air was heavy with heat and the scent of dry sagebrush. Every step was a struggle. Years of tireless farm labor had left their mark on his body, but Otis's heart was full of hope. He was going to collect his son's pension for Calvin, who had gone to serve in the army several months ago. Calvin, his only child, his pride, had always been the old man's support. Every message from his son, though rare, reassured Otis that Calvin was alive and well. And now it was time to collect the first pension payment, a small sum, yet one that would be a significant help for their modest existence. Stepping into the sheriff's office, Otis felt uneasy. An atmosphere always lingered here that wasn't welcoming to common folk. Sheriff Blackwood, an imposing man with a piercing gaze and an always impeccably polished badge, sat at his desk, sifting through papers. He was known for his strict, at times brutal grip, but Otis believed that justice was the same for everyone. "Sheriff, I've come for my son's pension, Calvin Grant. He's serving in the army, and I believe it's due now," Otis said, trying to speak firmly despite his nervousness. Sheriff Blackwood slowly raised his head. There was no sympathy, no recognition in his eyes. He merely gave the old man a cold glance, set his papers down, and uttered words that crashed down on Otis like an avalanche. "Calvin Grant? Ah, yes. He was hanged a couple of months back for horse theft. Case closed." The world around Otis swayed. The air left his lungs. He felt his heart clench with shock, with an unbearable, monstrous injustice. Hanged? Calvin? His Calvin, who wouldn't hurt a fly. Without a trial? It was impossible. His son was an honest man, dependable. The thought that Calvin could be involved in such a crime was absurd. The sheriff continued, his voice like a death sentence. "He was caught red-handed. No trial necessary. Simple case. You can go now." It was said with such icy indifference that Otis felt something dark, unfamiliar, begin to simmer within him. Anger, slow and burning, started to spread through his veins. The pain of losing his son, the agony of this blatant lie and cynicism from this man overwhelmed him. Otis left the sheriff's office like a ghost. Blackwood's words spun in his head like a broken record, each syllable causing unbearable pain. He couldn't believe it, wouldn't believe it. His son, Calvin, was too honest for such a thing. Calvin had always dreamed of serving, of protecting his country, not stealing. Otis knew his son better than anyone. He walked through the dusty streets of Dry Gulch, his gaze darting from one face to another, trying to find some clue, some fragment of truth. But everyone he approached averted their eyes or shrugged. People were afraid. In their silence and evasive answers, Otis sensed something more than mere indifference. He saw fear of Blackwood. After several days of searching, he stumbled upon old Mabel, a former laundress who had once known Calvin. She was known for her talkativeness, but had always been kind to the Grants. When Otis told her what had happened, her eyes widened in horror. "Hanged? Calvin? That's a lie," she whispered, glancing around. "I saw him the day they supposedly caught him. He was with other soldiers, and then..." The sheriff's men grabbed him. He shouted he was innocent, and he didn't have any horses. He said something about a package he was supposed to deliver to Blackwood. These words struck Otis like lightning. A package? What package? Hope, a thin, almost invisible thread, pierced through his despair. If Calvin was shouting about innocence, then he was innocent. And if he was supposed to deliver something to the sheriff, the information from Mabel became the starting point. Otis began to dig deeper, like a man possessed. He spoke with Calvin's former comrades, with merchants who had seen him that day, with anyone who might know anything. Gradually, piece by piece, the picture began to form. It turned out that Calvin, while on duty, had accidentally stumbled upon a scheme involving arms smuggling. The weapons were destined for Native American tribes, and the main organizer of this shadowy trade was Sheriff Blackwood. Calvin decided to report it to his commander, but first wanted to gather evidence. He found a certain package containing documents and evidence, and intended to deliver it to the sheriff, believing him to be honest and that he would help. But Blackwood didn't want his machinations exposed. He arranged for Calvin to be caught with stolen horses, a convenient alibi to eliminate an undesirable witness. The realization of this monstrous lie, this dirty game for which his son had paid with his life, filled Otis with burning, scalding anger. The pain in his heart now mixed with righteous fury, giving him strength to move forward. Otis's anger was so potent that the old man felt it almost physically. It burned from within, giving him strength where there should have been none left. He understood. Sheriff Blackwood wasn't just a corrupt official, he was a murderer, and he could not allow this crime to go unpunished. But how? How could a simple old man, without power or influence, challenge a powerful sheriff who held the entire town in fear? Otis knew he had to act cleverly and cautiously. He couldn't just burst into Blackwood's office with a revolver. That would be suicide. He needed reliable allies and irrefutable evidence. He remembered Thomas Tiger Johnson, a former federal marshal who had retired and settled in a secluded cabin outside Dry Gulch. Johnson was known for his honesty and uncompromising fight against corruption until he sustained an injury that forced him to leave the service. Otis made his way to his cabin and, despite his age and fatigue, told his story. He didn't ask for help, he demanded justice. Johnson, listening to him, was skeptical at first. But when Otis presented the evidence he had gathered, circumstantial testimonies, fragmented rumors, strange coincidences that pointed to Blackwood's scheme, the old marshal's face darkened. "Blackwood, I always felt something was off about him," Johnson grumbled. His anger at injustice flared up anew. He promised Otis his help. Together they devised a plan. It was clear that without direct evidence against Blackwood, they wouldn't achieve anything. Johnson proposed staging a stolen goods deal, a shipment that was supposedly due to arrive in Dry Gulch. With the help of one of his old informants, whom Blackwood trusted, they fed the sheriff information about a highly profitable contraband shipment that would be delivered to a secluded location outside town that night. The goal was simple: to catch Blackwood red-handed. It was an incredibly risky move. If Blackwood uncovered their plot, their lives would hang by a thread. But Otis was ready for anything for his son. Hope, a faint, almost invisible beacon, was his only guide in this darkness. The appointed night was moonless and windy. Johnson and Otis took positions in the bushes, not far from the old abandoned warehouse where Blackwood was supposed to arrive. Otis's heart pounded like a drum. Every shadow, every rustle seemed like a sign of danger. Finally, in the distance, headlights appeared. The sheriff's wagon pulled up. Blackwood got out of the vehicle, looking around. He was alone, which played into their hands. When he approached the warehouse and began to inspect the merchandise, Johnson gave the signal. This was the moment of truth. Johnson stepped out of the darkness, aiming his old but reliable revolver directly at Sheriff Blackwood. "Hands up, Blackwood. You're under arrest for corruption, smuggling, and the murder of Calvin Grant." The marshal's voice boomed through the night. Blackwood flinched, his face contorted in shock. He tried to draw his pistol, but Johnson was faster. A shot rang out and Blackwood's pistol flew to the side. "Don't do anything foolish," Johnson said calmly. At that moment, Otis emerged from the shadows. His eyes burned with righteous anger. "You hanged my son, Blackwood. You lied. You sold honor and lives." Blackwood, cornered, had no choice. He was caught red-handed, and this time the evidence was more than sufficient. Johnson immediately sent a signal to the nearest federal office, and within hours marshals arrived in Dry Gulch. The entire town was awakened by the news of the sheriff's arrest. People poured into the streets whispering, but without their former fear. When Blackwood was led through town in handcuffs, many couldn't believe their eyes. His face was pale, his gaze dulled. Sheriff Blackwood's trial became the most sensational case in the Wild West in decades. Otis Grant was the key witness. His testimony, supported by the evidence provided by Johnson, crushed Blackwood's defense. Other victims were found, who had remained silent for years, fearing retaliation. They too testified, confirming the full extent of Blackwood's vile scheme. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. He faced the gallows, the very fate he had unjustly prepared for the innocent Calvin. When the time came for the sentence to be carried out, the entire town gathered in the central square. Otis stood in the front rows, his face stern, but a fire burned in his eyes. As the noose was placed around Blackwood's neck and his body twitched one last time, a collective gasp swept through the crowd. For many, it was the end of a long nightmare. In Otis's eyes, there were no tears, only a deep, piercing sense of vengeful pleasure. Justice, though bitter, had finally prevailed. His son Calvin was vindicated in the eyes of all. His name was cleared. Otis Grant's story became a legend. He, a simple old man, had challenged the system and won. His actions inspired many, showing that even the smallest person can change the world if driven by righteous anger and an unquenchable hope for justice. Dry Gulch received a new honest sheriff, and the town slowly began to heal from the wounds of corruption and fear. And Otis, though he had lost his son, found peace in his soul, knowing that his Calvin rested with honor, and the villain had received his just deserts. This story, passed down by word of mouth, became an inspiration for all who believed in true justice.